Beth Jacino. She has more than 20 years of experience helping writers navigate the complicated space between manuscript and final book. A former literary agent and marketing director, Beth is now a developmental editor, writer, and publishing consultant for both traditional and self-publishing authors. She's the author of the award-winning The Author's Guide to Marketing and the travel memoir, Walking to the End of the World, 1,000 Miles on the Camino de Santiago. She's also ghostwritten half a dozen additional books for major publishers, independent presses, and self-published authors, and has guided hundreds of writers to publication. Beth has been a member of the Northwest Editors Guild since 2010 and has taught at writers' conferences, library writing workshops, bookstores, and literary events across the country. You can visit her online at bethjacino.com. She's also on Twitter and Instagram, and some of this information is on the handout that I'll be passing around shortly. And please join me in welcoming Beth. Thank you.
Okay. The trick is always when walking in front of it to hold your hand up. I know most of you. I have seen a lot of a particular type of question pass through the Guild's listserv, and it always comes back to, I have a client who wants to get published, and they've asked me for help. They've asked me information that I maybe don't know yet. As more and more authors are hiring independent editors, before they really start moving forward in the process, we become often a resource, or they hope we become a resource, in that dreaded question of, well, now what? I've done this much, well, now what? How do I navigate the next few steps? What's the right path for publication? But it's not just those of us who are working directly with authors who are writing books who are getting that kind of question. I mean, you've probably met that neighbor at the local potluck who says, oh, you're an editor? I wrote a book. And you say, I proofread technical documents. I don't know what happens next. But there's a certain understanding that if we work with words, we therefore must know what to do with them. And I think even for those of us who work in words, it's really easy to get stuck in our own silo. I know a lot of you who work very deeply in specific areas. You contract regularly with certain publishers, or you contract regularly with certain authors and genres. And when you're trying to do all of that, it's also hard to keep up with the changing trends and the changing ways that publishing has happened. So that's why we're here. I want to help you understand as much as we can in the next 90 minutes what the options currently are for the writers who you're working with who are writing some kind of book project, from children's books to textbooks to novels to nonfiction. And I happen to know that more than a couple of you are writers of your own, as well as being editors. And so maybe this will be helpful to you as writers as well. There's a lot of information I'm going to kind of throw at you at first. I want to talk about the entire process of self-publishing, and I also want to talk about what we can talk about traditional publishing, and then I want to talk about that weird in-between area that's happening that we're calling hybrid publishing or partner publishing. So I'm going to talk a lot. I am intentionally saving at least 10 to 15 minutes at the end for your questions. So if you have I didn't hear you, or you have can you clarify this, feel free to raise your hand and interrupt. But if you have well, are you going to talk about, or let me tell you my situation, we've got time for that. So we're ready. You've heard the bio, you kind of have an idea why I ended up being the person who's giving this talk tonight. I have worked across the board in the business side of books and as a writer, but in both traditional publishing and self-publishing. And I still really straddle that line. As a publishing consultant, I am collaborating or ghostwriting with authors for big 5 publishers at the same time that I am meeting with and project managing and consulting with authors who are following the self-publishing route. Today I had conversations about both big New York marketing plans, and from a trip I just came back to, and tried to explain the intricacies of what an ebook was to a woman who's publishing her first book on her own. And I think what that all comes down to, and what I have learned from that, most of all, is that there is no one right way for us to publish anymore. Just as every author brings their own unique set of strengths and weaknesses to the written page, we also bring our own set of skills and dreams and potential to publishing. So if you have a client who wants to talk about what to do with their book, the most important thing you can ask them is not about their budget or their timing or their audience or even their platform, but about why. Why do you want to get published? I've asked a lot of writers this question, and we've dug into it over the years. And you get a lot of different answers. When people get honest, you get a lot of different answers. There are a lot of people who want to write a book and get published because they want to make money. Like, that is their ultimate goal, and that is awesome, and I respect it. There are a lot of people who want to publish a book because they have that artist's desire to create, and they don't necessarily care how many copies it sells or how much money it makes, although everyone will always say, but making money would be nice. Making money would be nice is not the same as saying, this is why I want to do it. They're drawn to just put their work out into the world. There are people who have books that they want to put out, both fiction and nonfiction, because they want to change the world. They have a message. And so they care a lot about how many people see it, and that the right people see it, more than the money, and maybe even more than the art. And there are people who want to publish because it's the one thing in the world that their brother can't do. I don't know. Like, everybody has their own reason for this. And today, if you're working with writers who are writing books, you've probably come across, there are also people who are writing for fun and as a hobby. And now that publishing has opened up in certain ways, they kind of want to publish for fun and as a hobby too. This isn't something they want to be their career. This isn't something that they want to, change their life over. But they wrote a book and they want to put it out there and see what happens. I call this the bucket list writers. And they maybe recognize this about themselves and maybe don't, and you don't need to tell them that's what they are. But as you're talking to someone about why they would want to get published and what the path for them would be, it's helpful to understand that we're all coming to this for different ways. Because while there's no one right way to publish, every way ends up having its own pros and cons. And it also helps to understand how we got here. And there's a little bit of, for a long, long time, for most of our understanding of 20th century publishing, getting your book in readers' hands was like a maze. You had to find the entrance, and that wasn't always easy. And you had to navigate the twists and turns of sending the right self-addressed stamped envelope to the right person and getting the right response and reaching just the right individuals along the way who were going to help you. But if you could be one of those few who found the exit, who survived the maze, you would find a crowd of readers waiting. Publishing was hard. Writing a book was hard. There was a time when we didn't have a delete key or a save file. Do you know that we lost an entire suitcase full of Hemingway's novels because his wife left the only copies on a train? Writing a book was hard, publishing was hard. Not many people did it. Today, publishing is more like one of those choose-your-own-adventure novels from the 1980s, if you remember these. There are many different endings. If you want to go into that swamp and see what's there, turn to page 33. If you want your book to come out in 4 months, turn to page 27. If you want a publicist, turn to page 72. And all of these different paths can take you to all of these different endings. And some of them are disappointing, and some of them are kind of disastrous, and many of them are good. But when we have so many choices to make along the way, it's a lot more confusing than when somebody could just give you a flow chart. And that's when they ask us for help. So let's talk about what your clients can expect when the manuscript is done. And we'll start by talking about what most authors today, at least in the book side of things, are doing, which is independent self-publishing. We are long past the days when self-publishing could be written off as vanity publishing, although when I started, that was definitely the case, because self-publishing had no self-distribution. You would hire a company to give you boxes and boxes of books that they maybe printed nicely and maybe didn't, and then those books would often get stuck in your garage because you didn't really have a way to get them in front of readers. But the way that technology changed and the way that we've gotten to the point where there are sales channels and distribution channels that rival some of the small presses, authors are taking things into their own hands. And they're not just taking the distribution, they're taking the whole process. They're encouraged by the success stories that we've all heard. Everything from 50 Shades of Grey, which was originally written as fan fiction and published on a website, to The Martian, to Still Alice, which were all independently self-published books that went on to sell millions of copies. And Amazon will be happy to tell you that just coming from their own KDP, it stands for Kindle Direct Publishing, but it also now includes their print on demand and their paperback distribution. There are more than 1,000 authors last year who each earned more than $100,000 just through sales through that one channel of self-publishing. And they did it all without the help of a traditional publishing company. They did it even without the help of an author-subsidized help, like author-assisted self-publishing company. Most writers who self-publish today manage the process themselves. And that's because we're past this. We're past the point when a physical act of publishing and distributing a book was hard and required big machines and lots of storage space and deep pockets and a long list of those contacts and connections with brick and mortar retailers to get books in people's hands. Today, we don't just sell books online, we write them online. The internet changed not only the way that people buy books. We talk a lot about, well, now you can just buy everything on Amazon. Yeah, you can. But there are 13 million books on Amazon, so just listing yourself there doesn't always get you the readers you're looking for. But that's okay, because it also changes the way we make books. My laptop has all the software I need to not only write, but also to edit and even to design a book that would rival anything that's coming from the major publishers. When I teach this class in a little bit of a longer format to writers, I actually have two books, two hardcover fantasy novels. And I say, one of these was self-published, and printed through the print-on-demand system. And one of these was traditionally published through HarperCollins, printed on a boat, printed in China, shipped back by boat, whole 9 yards, tens of thousands of copies in the world. And I pass them around and I ask them to tell me which is which. Because what authors need to understand, and what we might need to understand, is that what print on demand did for self-publishing. And I am not a techie person, but I can say, so I can't exactly explain how it works, but what I know is that we no longer have to print in quantity. You no longer have to set up files on a printing press and then bring those cases of books home and pay for them. There's a computer attached to a printer somewhere in, I think, South Carolina, maybe North Carolina. And when somebody goes online and orders a book, that printer prints off one copy of the book and then immediately ships it to the place that it was ordered. Authors as self-publishers, as independent self-publishers, are no longer responsible for warehousing, are no longer responsible for distribution, are no longer responsible for some of the most time-consuming and money-consuming aspects that publishers used to provide for them on the logistics and fulfillment side. And that, you know what, more than the Kindle, because 30% of people read ebooks and 70% don't. And more than the other technology that's involved has made self-publishing comparable to what's coming out from traditional publishing. So it's no surprise that those 1,000 authors who are making $100,000 a piece are just a drop in the bucket. In 2018, more than 1 million new self-published books released in the United States. And that number, we're figuring it out by ISBNs. So because we need a separate ISBN for every edition of a book that releases, there's some overlap in there because an ebook and a paperback are going to be the same book but have two different numbers. But I can also break that number out and say almost 700,000 of those books were paperbacks printed only through KDP. KDP, the company owned by Amazon, has become the elephant in the room, not surprisingly probably, to self-publishing in the ways that Amazon.com has become the elephant in the room of retail. And most of those authors are clearly not making $100,000. There's no actual hard number for this, but the number that has always been thrown around in publishing circles is that a self-published book the average self-published book is going to sell fewer than 100 copies. Not 100,000, 100. So if your client wants to self-publish, chances are they're either going to choose or stumble down this route and manage the project themselves. And managing the project themselves is not the same as doing the project themselves. When I talk about do-it-yourself publishing and independent publishing, none of us should encourage authors to think that they can take a book from manuscript to publication without bringing in others to help them. And we know that because we know that the first thing that they need to do is editing. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, which is great, because usually I have to explain what developmental editing is, and copy editing, and line editing, and proofreading, and explain to writers that they need to do all of those things. But you know that. What I would say is, as you are working with your writers, please remind them of that. The hardest thing about self-publishing is seeing books come out that could have been great. And to work with authors who don't know what they don't know. And to find that challenging line of, let me make sure you know what the process is and how each one of those steps can be accomplished. Because if your book doesn't stand up quality-wise to the 1 million, plus, by the way, 400,000 traditionally published books, so basically 1.5 million books that are coming out every year, readers are never going to give it that chance. But the other thing that authors are doing is they're finding their own cover designers, and they're finding their own interior designers. And I know that some members of the Guild have really gone above and beyond and taught themselves the process of formatting of the interior of a book, both print and ebook. And that's a huge piece, because if a book doesn't look like a book, when we open it up, again, the reader's perception is never going to get as far as the words to know what that is. And cover designers, much like editors, have discovered that while they are perhaps not getting the same number of contracts from publishers, they are getting a lot of interest from independent authors. You know, independent authors who are trying to figure out how to make a book cover look good have a variety of opportunities across a variety of different price points. So if you've got an author on a budget, there are free or almost free templates if they have a little bit of technical knowledge and the ability to evaluate their own work or evaluate somebody's work that can help them get a cover that looks like a book cover. You know, it might not have exactly the images and the perfect representation of their story, but it has font that we can read and colors that we can see and a design that is nice and clean and professional. And there are a lot of individuals who are willing to design covers for other authors. And if you run into them over the course of working with authors, keep a list. That is a question that you will get asked a lot, is where do I get a good cover? Where do I get a good interior? If people want interiors, you can refer them to the Guild directory. But if the people want a cover, it's good to have that reference list in your pocket. And if you don't have one, let me know and I'll send you mine. Not only are they hiring contracts, but the other thing they're doing is they're managing their accounts. An author is deciding whether they're going to have both a print book and an ebook is the first question. I think a lot of people, and this happens less, but I think 5 years ago when I started doing this, a lot of people who would say, oh, I'm going to self-publish, so I'm only going to have an electronic book. Or I'm going to self-publish, so I'm going to have that thing on a Kindle. But they didn't know that they had options. And now we're at this point where we have options that are not cost prohibitive. And the important question is not, how can I publish? It's, where are my readers? Because ebooks started out being, oh, they're gonna take over, they're gonna like change the industry, print is dead. They maxed out at about 30% of the market and have been decreasing in the last few years. So ebooks overall are only like 27% of the total book market. But that 27% is incredibly weighted. So if your authors are writing genre books, I used to say if your authors are writing, remember the mass market paperback spinners used to be in all the stores, you'd like $5 for a book, not really expensive paper, wasn't really meant to be a keepsake, but it's a quick read. If your authors are writing books that would have fit on that spinner, then probably most of their audience now is reading electronically. The Romance Writers of America say that up to 90% of all romance novels that are sold electronically. If you have a romance novel client, they might not need print. They might only go electronic. Mystery and thriller, huge ebook markets. Fantasy, huge ebook markets. Curiously, young adult, much heavier print. There were a bunch of headlines about a year ago when that number first came out, and we went, so we think that teenagers have screens everywhere else. They want the one thing. They're looking at novels to be the one thing that's not a screen. Literary fiction, hard sell on ebook because it's a different kind of experience of reading it. So you're helping them understand, they need to understand, do I want to have print, do I want to have ebook, do I want to have both? If they want to have print, the two big players in print are KDP, who really is like the big player. But most people will say that the other option, the good other option for most authors is an organization called Ingram Spark. Because Ingram Spark is the print-on-demand program that is run by Ingram Book Group, who is the owner of the wholesale catalog that most retailers are ordering their books from. And so it kind of made sense for this company that is already distributing millions of titles from small presses and from independents, and to have a whole nother catalog that would be available. So if you're listed as a print-on-demand book through either KDP or through Ingram Spark, or through, there's a website called lulu.com. I always love that self-publishing companies all have these funny names that I have to say from up front. Because the other one I was going to talk about is if there's an art, like one of the best art books, like visually, graphically, 4-color, great paper, is a company called Blurb. But all of these have, you all go, yeah, okay. All of these have distribution channels. If you upload your book to any of these companies, there is a way for you to get an ISBN and to be listed in the Ingram Wholesale Catalog, which makes you available through any retailer. But every online retailer these days is just picking up the whole dang catalog and listing it. because it doesn't cost them anything to list the book. They're not going to order it because it's print on demand until somebody actually orders it from them, and then they'll have it shipped directly. So my print on demand self-published title isn't in Elliott Bay. It's not in Finney Books here, but it is on the Powell's book website, and it is on barnesandnoble.com, and it is on amazon.com, and it is on Books A Million, and every now and then it's on Target, but I can never figure out when Target is selling all of the books and when they're not. So that's one of the things to think about. If they're going to go print, they have that. Who are they going to use as their print distributor? If they're going to go ebook, who are they going to use as an ebook? Kindle is the elephant in the room. They are probably 75 to 80% of all ebooks sold. Happen through Amazon and for the Kindle. They really just took off, and part of that is because they have a good app that is readable on all different types of devices. So people are reading their Kindle on their iPad or on their iPhone. 30% of all ebooks, by the way, read on phones. I love that response. I only throw that in there because people always respond to it. And I'll say, like, I was on an airplane this week. Like, sometimes it's helpful to have a very small screen. But anyway, that's what people are doing. People are commuting, people are traveling, people are doing something. And so your ebooks are happening on, and the Kindle app is the thing that just everybody puts. There are 3 other recognizable ebook distributors. The Nook still exists. Bless you, Barnes and Noble. iBooks, which I think isn't even called iBooks now. I think it's just kind of wrapped up as books in iTunes, but the Apple Store. And then Kobo, which was the e-reader for Borders, before Borders rested in peace, but had been sold before then, and is now been adopted by independent bookstores as their e-reader of choice, but also has a fairly decent audience internationally. Chapters, the Canadian chain bookstore, sells Kobos. So an author who's going to self-publish an ebook has basically one choice. The Kindle will give them a discount, a benefit, if they're exclusive to Kindle. If you only distribute your ebook through us, we will let you join our lending program. So people who are joining what's called Kindle Unlimited pay, I think, $20 a month, and they can download unlimited books, unlimited ebooks. Authors still get paid for those. So it's not like if your book is being lent out, there's no remuneration. They will actually track the number of pages that lender or that borrower reads and pay you by the page. Which also tells you how much your Kindle is paying attention to you. But they do that basically because they only have a set amount of money to spend, and some of the scammers had quickly figured out that they could put a book up and then have a bunch of robots download to borrow their own book and get thousands and thousands of dollars. And so Amazon's trying to stay one step ahead of the scammers, but this is how it works right now, is you get this. You also have access to some countries, you get better royalty rates in some countries. You can do things like put your book on sale and give it away for free. Anyway, they're trying to build this place where you want to only make your book available through our channels so that we get even more of the market share. Which works really well for certain authors, and other authors would prefer the wider distribution. I want to make sure I hit not just that 80%, but I want to hit all of them. And so I can create accounts directly as an individual on all 4 of these channels and upload my one file, and they will sell the book through their sales channels and just send me money every month for the books that sell. And authors make 70% of the list price of an ebook. And so a lot of times, for a lot of independent self-published authors, they're making more money per book sold for an ebook than they are for print. So that's kind of fun. It sounds like a lot of work, though. What are the benefits of taking all of this on? Well, first of all, you get the highest return per book sold because you're not sharing the revenue with anyone. The thing about having a traditional publisher is that you have a business partner, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that means. But the important part here is that it means you share the revenue. They get some of the money too. If you are your own publisher, you've paid your own costs up front, but those can be limited. And instead of 10 to 25% of the list price of the book, you're bringing home 40 to 70% of the list price of a book. And you're setting what that retail price is. So if you think you can sell your novel for $35, you can try. Or if you want to sell more copies of a book at lower amounts, you can try. You have total control of the process. No one's going to reject your proposal. No one's going to try to gatekeep you from bringing whatever interesting and creative project that you have written out into the world. You want to, if your client wants to have a book that has spiral binding or CD inserts or die cuts or something unusual, or an entire novel written in iambic pentameter, whatever it is, if they want to go through the process of figuring out how to distribute it and sell it and make it, they can do it. And that's really interesting and really cool, but it's also worth mentioning that it isn't easy. What are the challenges of independent self-publishing? Well, there is a steep learning curve. Once you do this a few times, it starts to make sense. But the first time through, encourage your author to make Google their friend. Everything can be Googled. Every question that has been asked, some other author has already gone through it. But you are learning every step of the way. You're learning how to think about fonts, and what does the interior of a book look like, and how does a person read an ebook, and how does a person write cover copy. If you're the independent publisher, you're the one who's writing the back cover copy. You're doing all of it. And that takes a lot of work. Obviously, the quality of these projects varies because it is dependent only on the individual who's creating it. And so I can give you a self-published book that I do compare to any of the major publishers coming out. That particular author was the creator of a video game and had a huge following and had a huge bank account and also had a really good story. And he worked with editors for years to polish it, and he made this really great young adult story. And then he found out that how long traditional publishing takes. And he said, you know what, I'm going to do this myself. And so he hired an artist to design his own cover, like the original artwork of his piece, and he paid an interior designer a lot of money to make individual chapter headers and all of those things. It is a beautiful, beautiful book. And that can be the quality if that's your budget. There are also people who I swear are taking notes in a meeting like this, going home, typing them in, hitting publish, and seeing what happens tomorrow. Or spending that little amount of time. Of the 400,000 people who are participating right now in National Novel Writing Month, several hundred of them are going to take that draft on December 1st and make it a Kindle. And that is unfortunate. But it's true. And it's something that, as an author, you have to kind of work your way through because the quality does vary. And so, yes, there is still some stigma. There's still a lot of people, I'm a member of the Authors Guild and participate in their online forums, and there are still some people who say, well, that's not real publishing. You're not really published if you self-published. You're not really published. You're not published like I am. You're not really published if you have taken this channel. Just because you've worked and learned and done more work, maybe, from the practical side than the traditional authors have. On the other hand, those stigmas are changing because of those success stories that we're hearing. Because of The Martian, because of, 50 Shades of Grey. Because of all of these books, because USA Today had a specific policy not to review self-published books until their romance book editor last year was making her top 10 book list of the end of the year. The top 10 romance books released in 2018, and 2 of them were self-published. because those authors had left their publisher. They were long experienced, very established authors who had left their publishers and said, we can do it better than they can. We can find our own audience. And so we're in that place where we're starting to think about this publishing thing differently. And we're starting to think about how to make that work. So what does that mean for you as an editor? I think it means that we have some responsibilities to help our clients think through that process that they're going through, especially if you're open to it. You're going to get questions about things like front and back matter, not just the manuscript. Proofreaders, this is probably especially you, maybe copy editors as well. If I'm my own publisher, I have to figure out what goes on a cover page. What goes on a copyright page? How do I even get copyright? And those are all standard questions that will come up over and over. By the way, the easiest answer to ISBN, like, do I need an ISBN? Yes. Well, how do I get one? That sounds so scary. You go to isbn.org and you give them a credit card number and they give you a number. I mean, I think we think that this is some kind of big hollowed project of like, I have registered my copyright. No, you just write in your manuscript copyright date and your name and the author's name, and that book, that protects it. Now you can still register your copyright. I think it's like copyright.gov is the website, but it takes months to hear back from them. And you don't need to have a registered copyright certificate in order to register, or in order to say that your book is protected by copyright. So authors aren't waiting for that to happen. They're just writing a copyright page. Those are really the only two things you have to have in your front and back matter. The rest of it is entirely up to the author and the kind of project. My advice is always don't reinvent the wheel. Pick up one of those comparative books. Your author is writing this. Look at what other books like this say. Write it down. Reminding them of the importance of citations and permissions. Again, this is probably mostly you proofreaders and copy editors, but as a dev editor, this comes up because writers love song lyrics. So much do they love song lyrics. And an independent, self-published author is going to be entirely responsible for tracking down the permissions, or, if they're smart, deleting the song lyrics. I have one guy last year who decided to jump through all the hoops. He needed Bob Dylan lyrics in his book. He needed them. And he took an extra 6 weeks, and I don't want to tell you how many hundreds of dollars to get those song lyrics, but he did eventually get the permission. So go for it, good for him. Your job is to remind them that that is part of their job. Encourage professionalism in design and content in that piece. You as an editor probably have more experience with books than a lot of the writers you're working with. You've seen a wider variety of them. You've hopefully read a lot of books. Don't be afraid to give them comparative titles. Give them things to look at. The hardest thing for self-published authors is what they don't know. And then, I guess, remember in the end that the author owns this project, not you, and whatever mistakes they make, it's their name on the cover. It's their name on the book. There are definitely authors I have worked with through this process who I've thought, I know my name's in the acknowledgments, but I'm pretty sure that no one's ever going to read the acknowledgments, so I think it's okay. From a business note, for those of you who are interested in this kind of topic, there is a huge market untapped market, I think, for editors who are also willing to serve, interested in serving as project managers or as coaches through the process. Like I said, this is a steep learning curve. If you can figure out how authors self-publish and take them through that smooth process, there are a lot of writers who would love not to hire a whole company, not to give away their manuscript, but just to have a person who comes alongside them and either helps them set their plan and then is available to answer questions, Or I'm always surprised how many authors in this area really want to hand over a manuscript and have you do it for them. Just find me a designer, find me a proofreader, find me the process, give me approval, like create my accounts on these things, upload the files. Uploading files is scary, whatever. But if you can be an editor who also can help them through this process, there are consulting rates. So that's something to think about. Because indie publishing is a lot of work. And like I said, there are these authors who they're publishing for a bucket list. They're publishing for fun. They're publishing to see what this is like. And they don't want to do all that. They don't want to go through the work of finding a traditional publisher, but they also don't want to go through all the work of doing this independent thing. As one writer told me, I don't want to learn how to snake a drain. I just want to hire a plumber. And that has always been this place where the self-publishing companies exist. Again, before print on demand, before ebooks, the only way really to self-publish was to hire what I call them subsidy presses. They will call themselves a lot of different things. But the idea is that these are businesses that for a fee or for a series of fees, they take an author's manuscript and make a book. They do all the things that we talk about. They put in the front and back matter. They register the ISBN. They register the copyright. They write the cover copy. They manage the printing and the distribution and the sales. All the writer needs to bring to that is a manuscript and a credit card. And those companies might give a manuscript a light edit or a sort of proofread. But their job is not to make a great book. Some of the best known subsidy presses happen under the Author Solutions brand. And Author House, iUniverse, Ex Libris, Westbow, Archway, Book Country, Balboa, they, for a long time, were owned by the same mega company that owned Penguin Random House, but they were not associated in any way. Author Solutions is in Indiana and did not have the special private numbers of the publishers in New York. But there's also independent companies that will show up at writers' conferences or book festivals and will meet writers and pitch themselves. And like Mill City Press and Dog Ear and Outskirts. And there's more upstart companies than I can remember or list. And I don't want to make this sound like it's a bad option, because there's no bad option for everyone. There are certain writers for whom the services that these companies provide are exactly what they need. They want to hand over a manuscript and they want to hold a book in their hands. And that's what's important to them. And that's what's going to happen when they get there. But I think this is also a place where a lot of disappointment happens, because subsidy press's purpose is not to sell books to readers. Subsidy presses exist to sell services to authors. And so they're going to publish whatever they can get away with publishing. No, that sounded negative. They're going to publish what they are given without putting a lot of filters on it and without taking the time to really encourage authors to slow down, because you don't want to slow down. You want to get that book out there. You want to get that book out there with a cover, and then you want to buy these marketing services, and then you want to have this whole process that's coming around. And that can create friction with authors who expected somebody to act more like a publisher and to be more interested in getting books out there, selling books. So it as you're talking to your authors and they say, oh, I was contacted by this company, what is your responsibility as an editor? Well, first of all, remind them to Google everyone. Some subsidy companies have great reputations. They might be a little more expensive than doing it on your own, but they are providing consistent service and great customer service. Some subsidy companies have been sued by their own authors dozens of times in the last year. Last year, there was a business in Oklahoma called Tate Publishing that had been around for 20 some years. It published thousands upon thousands of authors, mostly in the inspirational market. And they used to have a great reputation, but if you raid Google, over a series of years, authors started complaining. They weren't getting calls back. They weren't getting their checks. They're still supposed to be getting a percentage of all the sales of those books. They weren't getting these things. And then the whole company, and then the printing presses were recalled for lack of payment on that loan. And then the Attorney General of Oklahoma shut down the entire company for failure to pay taxes. And now the owners of that company are in jail. But up until the point where business was shut down, there were still authors who were sending in their manuscripts and sending in their credit card numbers because they didn't realize what was happening. So if you have authors who are considering being published, ask them if they've Googled the company. We're writers. We talk about everything. We write it all down. If authors have an opinion about another author or about a business or about we have shared it somewhere. Encourage them to shop around and compare prices. Again, there are subsidy companies that have great reputations. And yeah, there's a markup. You pay more for service. And there are companies who charge 4 or 5 times what their costs are for every single little thing. And tell their clients, oh, well, we think your book is special and we'll take it to Hollywood and we'll pitch it to Hollywood producers because we think you could be a movie. Just give us $10,000. And there's enough authors who do that. And this is I used to be an agent. I care a lot about contracts. I care a lot about know everything you sign. And writers can get kind of excited about the possibility that their book is about to get published, and so they just sign whatever is sent to them. So I'm going to say this a lot tonight. Encourage them to read and understand their contract. If there's something they don't understand, help them find someone who will. The Authors Guild, the Authors Guild has a contract reading service. I'm not sure that they'll use it for subsidy companies, but they probably will because it's in their best interest to make sure the authors are taken care of. So that's self-publishing. That is, I want to be my own person and I want to own everything that's going out there. I want to flip this then and talk for a little while about the other side of the publishing spectrum. How do we get to traditional publishing? My client dreams of having a New York editor or having a 3-martini lunch. By the way, I've never seen that happen. Or having, to being interviewed on Good Morning America, being translated into foreign languages. Which means your client is dreaming about not just traditional publishing, but big publishing. This is the thing that you see in the movies. Film rights and international translations. This is what has come down to, in the way that we talk about things, is the big 5. It used to be the big 6. It's the continually consolidating conglomerate. Why did I think I could say that? The continuing consolidating conglomerate of publishing. Penguin Random House, Hachette Livre, Macmillan's, HarperCollins, and Simon & Schuster. These 5 companies, which by the way are subsidies of even bigger companies, control about 1/4 of all traditionally published books. The year that Penguin Random House merged, because it used to of course be Penguin and Random House, they published alone 15,000 books, new titles in English. And they do that under a variety of imprints. So you're not necessarily seeing, Simon & Schuster on every Simon & Schuster book. Every single company owns different lines that specialize in different things. So if you have a fantasy author, a science fiction author, you're not pitching, now I can't remember, Tor. I think Tor is HarperCollins. You're not pitching HarperCollins, you're pitching Tor and those editors and those people. But at the end of the day, those companies all come together for scale, for finances, and they keep growing. You know, Sasquatch was an independent press here in Seattle until, what, last year, 2 years ago? When they became part of the Simon & Schuster. Penguin, okay. Oh yeah, there it is. But I don't want to only talk about the big five, because when we talk about big publishing, we're talking about any publisher that's publishing more than 100 books a year. Because that's the scale at which you're doing whole catalogs every season. That's the scale where you have a full-time staff of marketing and publicists who are releasing new books on a regular basis. That's where you have not just the big five, but companies like Houghton Mifflin and Scholastic if you're writing children's books, and Tyndale if you're writing inspirational books. And once again, we have to talk about Amazon, because Amazon's traditional publishing line is publishing more than 1,000 books a year. Royalty paying, proposals, agents, the whole 9 yards. What these houses all have in common is the scale and the reach. That's still out, those things are still out of reach for self-publishing. It's really hard for a self-published author to get on Good Morning America. It's really hard for a self-published author to sell their German rights to a German publisher who knows how to make this book in German, but also to sell it into the German bookstores. And that's probably why so many of the success stories who started in self-publishing, like The Martian and like 50 Shades, ended up signing with traditional publishers down the road. Because traditional publishers can get you places that self-publishing can't. They're good at getting, big publishers are good at getting big, commercially successful, appealing books in front of a lot of people. And what that means is they have this, I made a scale for that. I made slides for that. Huh, okay. They have a bottom line focus. Every editor I've met at a big five publishing house loves books and cares about words and is absolutely interested in this being the best content it can possibly be. But they report to somebody who reports to somebody who reports to somebody who knows that HarperCollins is owned by Rupert Murdoch and is affecting somebody's stock price. And so when a publisher is deciding that they want to work with a particular author, they're looking not only at the quality of those words, but also they're doing the math and they're figuring out how marketable they are, how saleable they are. I think it's important to remember when we talk about traditional publishers that they are business partners with authors. An author brings their intellectual property, their book. A publisher brings all of the knowledge and the resources to take that book and release it. A publisher invests the money to hire the designer and do the design and print the books and ship them and warehouse them and send out a sales team and do a lot of in-house editing to help make this the best book it can be. They are not an author's patron supporting great writing. They're their partner. And that means that if your client is thinking that they dream of a big publishing experience, they need to be able to think and talk about their books as a product that is being sold, that is being evaluated as being something that's going to be sold. It's the difference between having a writer who says, I wrote something entirely unique and no one has ever done this before and only a few people are going to understand me. And having a client who says, I have studied the market and I have tried to connect with my readers for years and I know why this is the topic that people are looking for right now. And here's where I fit in and here's where I'm unique and special within that marketplace. Big publishers are very selective. They are flooded with submissions and they can afford to be choosy. If your client has a good book, they're not ready yet. Because publishers are getting thousands of good books and they have about 10 slots available. There's an agent named Kristen Nelson in Denver who at the end of every year, she publishes the statistics of how many submissions she got and how many she said yes to. And she talks about, she requests full manuscripts and turns them down. She loves the story, writing's good, the pacing is off. She'll turn down a manuscript, publishers will turn down a manuscript because they don't like the pacing. Or that character wasn't fully developed. Or that idea doesn't feel, like I don't know that there's anybody who has that particular need that the author is describing. Catherine Stockett, who wrote The Help, if you remember The Help, came out a few years ago, wrote this fantastic piece about how, and this is great for editors, she was rejected by publishers 60 times for that manuscript. And she kept rewriting it. She kept sending it out, and she already had magazine connections and some New York connections. And they were still sending rejections, and she would keep revising and keep working on it over the space of like 3 years. She keeps getting no, she keeps making the book better. Until there's a point at which the book is ready for a publisher, and it finds an agent and a publisher within, I think, 10 days of that final draft. But it was a process of continuing to work on it and continuing to think about it, because we're past the point where editors at big publishing houses look at something and see potential that they have time to develop. They don't have time to develop, and they don't need to, because there's 9,000 other authors who are ready to go. Well. Speaking of being selective, they're also looking for authors with ready-to-go audiences. This is what we call platform. If I'm a big publisher, I'm looking not only for a great idea, but I'm looking for an author who knows how to get that great idea to as many people as possible. I worked with a client over the summer who, she was maybe not, she's a business coach for women. And there are a lot of business coaches for women. They're like life coaches. And there are a lot of people who have the same advice that she has. But she's the one who has spent the last 10 years building an audience of 500,000 Facebook followers and 70,000 Instagram followers. She's the one who has spent 10 years being online every day because her specific market is social media marketing. And building people who trust her in that world. So when a publisher looks at her, I mean, we can get cynical about that and say, oh, they only want the famous people. But think about it, the famous people are the ones who know their audience and know what their audience is looking for because they're already providing it. There are dollar signs to those followers, but there's also a commitment to the message because she's consistently given it for a decade. When big publishers are looking at an author's scale, they're looking at numbers that have to have thousands, if not tens of thousands. You have a blog, your client has a blog and has, 400 visitors a month, which by the way is about what my blog has. That's not a scale that a big publisher is looking for. That's not enough people to sell those things or to be competitive in those markets. So if your client dreams of a big publisher, encourage them to be ready to talk about themselves and to do the work up front that's going to build that relationship and connection. This is also true for novelists, less so, memoirists, less so, but to a certain extent, if a publisher is faced with 4 good ideas and one of them has consistently gone to writing conferences and made connections and has a list of known authors who will be their endorser, or has a decent social media following with other people who love to read, or who has certain awards, or who has certain recognition, then that's all going to weigh into how we see how well this book is going to do. You always need a literary agent to get to a big publisher. Okay, here's a job that's sometimes misunderstood, so here's the quick and dirty version. A literary agent is to a book what a realtor is to a house. As a literary agent, you are representing, I am representing the author's intellectual property. I am helping them prepare it, I'm helping them make it look good, and I'm helping them reach the people who want to buy it, which in this case is a publisher. The way that a realtor will help you stage your house, they're not going to actually do the work, but they'll tell you what to do. Get all the paperwork and all the legal work done and help you find the people who want to buy your house. Agents are connected to publishers and present projects that they think publishers are going to want to see. Agents are not licensed or take a test. That's my one, like, I broke the realtor thing. You could go home tonight, put on your website that you are a literary agent, and people will start sending you manuscripts tomorrow. I got pitched today. I haven't been an agent in 10 years. They don't go away. But agents are as good as the connections that they have. Agents are also commission-based. You never pay an agent. You do not hire an agent. Some authors will say, oh, I'm gonna go hire myself an agent. No, it's a mutual agreement that we're both gonna benefit from this relationship. Your agent is your advisor and your guide. Sometimes they're lawyers, sometimes they're people who came out of the publishing industry and know a lot about books. They get 15%, always, just, that's industry. And authors find agents, ideally, first of all, through referrals. If you know a writer who has an agent and that writer is willing to introduce you to that agent, that is one of the easiest and best ways to get above the slush pile of, the inbox. Most people will try to reach out to agents through query letters, through submissions. Every agency, every agent has guidelines for how they want things submitted to them. But query letters can get overwhelming. When I was an agent, and this is 10 years ago, it's hard, it's so much worse now. But when I was an agent, I was the low person on the totem pole at our agency. And I got 3,000 query letters a month from writers who wanted us to represent them. In my last year there, I took 2 new clients on out of that slush pile. So the query letter submission process, while it's important to help writers understand what their message is not always the most effective way to get yourself to an agent. Get introductions. Go to conferences where agents are taking pitches. Or if you can't get to that conference, at least know what conferences agents are going to, because that tells you what agents are actually looking for clients, which agents are looking for clients. You can ask me more questions about that at the end, but I want to finish this up. Big publishing moves slowly. It takes 12 to 18 months. From the time a writer turns in the manuscript, this is post-contract, the writer has found an agent, the agent has found a publisher, you've gone through a couple of months of contract negotiation, because nothing in this business moves quickly. And then it will be 12 to 18 months from the time they turned in the manuscript until the time the book comes out. You're not going to change that. If your client has a book that is important to see before the 2020 election, this is not your path. There are a lot of reasons for it. The time it takes to pitch the sales and go out and let Walmart know what books are there and all of this. But it takes that long. Staff and internal change is common. So the company itself is stable. Nothing's going to happen to HarperCollins. However, the imprints within that staff, or within that company, tend to be more flexible. Because it's not a big deal for certain corporations to shut down an imprint, to do layoffs, to move staff around. This year, 2 days before I was due to turn in a manuscript on the biggest book I had written to date, the editor emailed to tell us that she had been laid off and the entire imprint had closed. That was Simon & Schuster. I had another client whose imprint shifted focus and the entire PR team, the publicity team, was laid off 5 days before their book release. So if you have an author who's thinking that big companies mean stability, it's worth always reminding people that we can't predict what's going to happen. We can make our best guess, we can make our best effort, but stuff happens. They make all the publishing and packaging decisions. Big publishers decide your cover, and your title, and your release date. They might ask you for your opinion on that. If you have a good agent and you have a good relationship with your publisher, they might even read your response to your opinion on that. But they're still going to give you the cover that they want to give you. They are very low risk. No joke. With this many options coming in, and with the number of books they need to sell in a very, very crowded market, they're not taking risks that they can avoid. If you have an unusual book, if your client has an unusual book, if your client has a long shot idea, this may not be the way to do it. Big publishers are the ones who turned down J.K. Rowling writing under a pseudonym. The writing is great, but we don't know anything about this author. And so they all turned down the Robert Galbraith books because good writing wasn't enough. Also, I want to talk about the fact that those big publishers are not your only option. Big publishing houses sell big books, and they make some authors big. Small independent publishers combined take up more than half the marketplace of books that are sold in the country. And by this I mean any publisher that publishes fewer than 100 titles a year. Some of them might only publish 5 or 1. Some of them are one-person businesses working out of the basement. Some of them are long-established companies that have a very clear staff and office and presence and reputation. All combined, there are 1,200 small presses in the United States, according to the Association of American Publishers. They are scattered across the country, and usually with their own focus. So if you want inventive literary fiction and nonfiction, you go to Grey Wolf in Minnesota. If you want books about the outdoors, you go to Mountaineers Books here in Seattle. There's Tin House and Hawthorne in Portland for literary presses, and there's Wild Rose Press for romance, and there's Copper Canyon for poetry, and there are publishers that are only there for military history or for books about Alaska. You can find entire directories in the library or online that will help you figure out what small presses are interested in what kinds of topics. But also the other thing I would say is look at your comparative titles. When I was writing a travel memoir about walking 1,000 miles on a 1,000-year-old trail, one of the things I decided was I wanted my book to be available for sale in REI. And so I went to REI and I looked at who was selling travel memoirs in REI, and I realized that it wasn't HarperCollins and it wasn't Random House. It was Mountaineers. And so they're the first publisher I went to talk about it because they were reaching the audience that I wanted to reach. Pay attention to what those publishers are. It also turns out that if you're writing for a small audience, chances are your bookshelf should be filled with other books that are reaching that audience. The thing about small presses, I can give you a good picture of like what working with big houses is like because they are consistent in their habits. Small presses are all over the map. It's like being on a road trip and stopping at a diner on the way home, and you could go to McDonald's, and McDonald's is going to taste like McDonald's wherever you are. It's good. It's good road trip, I think. It's cheap. It's predictable. You could stop at a mom and pop diner and pay the same amount of money and either have the best meal of your entire life and this incredible experience, or you can get food poisoning because they're about to be shut down by the health department. And so when we're talking about small presses, it is again important to go back and do the homework and pay attention and look at the lists that publisher is already releasing. What else can I tell you in 5 minutes? Financially, small presses work like big presses. They pay advances to authors, they pay royalties, they invest the money in creating a book. Marketing might be minimal, but it is provided, and the small press is never asking a client or an author for money. That's a different path. Most of them target specific audiences. They know how to get into these specific sales channels. I'm friends with a physical therapist here in Seattle who published a book last year called Fundamental Anatomy for Aerial Artists. It is an entire anatomy book just for trapeze and silks and circus performers. That is not a book that HarperCollins is going to look at. But there is an entire publisher that specializes in anatomy and body books, specifically for different physical activities and sports. And North Atlantic Books was her perfect publisher. They knew how to hook her up with the illustrators. They knew how to get her into the professional conferences of other physical therapists and doctors and body workers. They knew all of the ways that she was going to get to the audience that she needed to get to. Small presses are more flexible about timing. Very rarely do they require agents. Sometimes they just don't know what to do with an agent. You might find small presses that will publish in 6 to 12 months rather than 12 to 18. They are definitely open to more risk. Some of the most interesting books that have hit our shelves come from small presses. Whether it's Tinker's, which is a 45,000 word literary novel historical novel about a man with epilepsy that is utterly beautiful and won a Pulitzer, but was published by NYU School of Medicine, Bellevue Press. To Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, the Quirk Books in Philadelphia, author who figured out that Pride and Prejudice is past copyright and you can do whatever you want to it, including adding zombies. And most recently, White Fragility. Do you realize that this book that has been on the New York Times bestseller list for 62 weeks was published by Beacon Press at Wright, the official press of the Unitarian Church? They don't quite know what to do with this book. How do you help your clients? If they want traditional publishing, do they belong with small presses? Do they want to go down that path with big presses? Well, help them define their audience. Help them take a realistic look at their platform and their desired outcome. If they want to make this into a big thing, are they willing to take the time to build a platform, to make connections, to build relationships, to get to know the agent, to get to know the publisher? Are they that invested in that big book? Do they understand their comparative titles and who publishes them? Don't get so flattered they say yes to a publisher that's not a good fit. As much as we talk about it's hard to get published, there are small presses that are actively looking for authors who do not necessarily fit what they are trying to do. The author's dreams do not fit what this publisher is doing. And again, don't sign a contract you don't understand. All right, one more thing I want to talk about real quick. Hybrid publishing is actually the reason I started talking about this, because people kept asking me about partner publishing and hybrid publishing. And what is this in-between world that is starting to emerge? This is a word that's so new, its meaning is only beginning to be established. And companies aren't always good at knowing to call themselves hybrids. However, they call themselves partner publishers. They call themselves, all these different things. However, IBPA, the Independent Book Publishing Association, has come up with a list of standards for what true hybrid publishing means. Because a lot of those subsidy publishers will call themselves hybrid because it sounds cool and it sounds like something we want to be part of. I'm not going to read this whole list to you. It's available on the slideshows and maybe it will show up in the notes and it will be on the video. But what all of these things come down to are three things. One, it is an author subsidized business model. The author invests financially through the publisher up front, usually a few $1,000s. And then the hybrid publisher provides all of the services that a publisher would do. They have copy editing and proofreading, they design a cover, they design the interior, they manage the distribution, they have limited sales teams involved. And the author, in exchange for paying some of the money up front that's involved in publishing, gets a much higher, significantly higher royalty rate on the other end. So if I'm an author working with traditional publishing, it's very standard for me to get a 10% royalty, 10% of the list price. If I'm a hybrid author, I should be getting 20 to 25% of the list price. Shared risk, shared reward. But the other thing to say about hybrids, they're selective, just like traditional publishers. Hybrid publishers take submissions, proposals, query letters. Each hybrid publisher has its own purpose, its own mission statement. And so they're looking for authors who have good books and who have marketing potential and who fit what their purpose is. And if an author doesn't fit that, oh, look, I did that, yep. No, clear, yep. Selective criteria, clear mission and audience. In order to do that, they have to say no to certain books. So She Writes Press is probably the best known hybrid example, especially out here. Brooke Warner, who was a publisher, or was an editor in a publishing house for a long time, created a house that was specifically for women writers. And they come together and they create joint programs to help women promote other women. Greenleaf Press, Greenleaf Publishing down in Texas, specializes in practical nonfiction. They are looking for those business people, those CEOs, those leaders who have speaking platforms and are looking for somebody to help them make a book. I never know how to say that. Whitfinstock is in Oregon and tends to do more academic spirituality books. They've hit up several of the college professors I know who have, academic writing and papers. If you're going to help your clients in this area, if your client says, hey, I was contacted by a hybrid, first of all, make sure that it is a hybrid. That it is someone who there is a benefit for that author. Because these authors who succeed here are generally people who have a lot of motivation to go out and sell their own book. The more copies you sell, the better those extra royalties come across. And who have a good book, but for whatever reason are not looking for the traditional path. They don't want to spend the time. They don't want to jump through the hoops. Maybe they do want that higher royalty. I know a lot of really motivated authors who say, my book is going to mostly sell through my events, my speaking things, my channels, so I want the money. But I don't want to do all the work to figure out how to self-publish. This is that place where this works well. Review the IBPA guidelines, remind them to read and understand their contracts. Keep saying that. Okay, I said I was going to give you 15 minutes. I'm really giving you 10. But that was 5 paths to publication that authors are fulfilling today, and a whole lot of information. And what didn't I talk about? What do you need to know? I have left you stunned. Yes, David.
You're just really good.
Thanks. Yeah, Amy?
So I have never heard the term hybrid publishing. This is kind of a new idea over the past couple of years.
I would say She Writes Press was real. Greenleaf has been around forever. It's been around in the nonfiction business thing. People who have platforms who go out and speak to their professional conferences.
Like the book at the back of the room.
Yeah, or people who have a huge mailing list, people who have had their own audiences, have been following this for a while. She Writes was really the one that brought it to the average writer who we're going to encounter on our daily basis, because they're doing fiction as well as nonfiction partly, and because they just do a lot more marketing. I think the guidelines from IBPA have only come out in the last 6 to 8 to 12 months.
So the difference between, what did you call it, subsidy presses?
Subsidy presses.
Back in the day, it was called a vanity press.
Yeah. Subsidy presses, you give them money, they make a book. It doesn't matter what you give them.
Yeah.
I can send them my grocery list and a few $1,000s and they'll publish it.
So the hybrid aspect is an indicator of it's a
Yes, it has been gate kept.
Yeah.
It has been filtered. It has been, like, someone has looked at this and said this is a good book. Yeah, hybrid is really new, but I think especially in Seattle, I think because She Writes is in California, I'm running into, I don't know if you guys are, but I'm running into it more and more, and they tend to have presences at like writers' conferences, you know. They'll have a table, they'll have information. And the really important piece of it, and what IBPA comes back to a lot, is they have to have a mission and a purpose, and they have to have a filter that says no. Greenleaf, I think Greenleaf is really proud of the fact that they take 10% of the books that are submitted. They'll still charge you, but you're being charged for a reason. It wasn't, yes.
So a hypothetical situation.
Yeah.
I work with one of the small presses in the Midwest, and say I work with a client who's interested in traditional publishing.
Mm-hmm.
I think the writing is pretty good, but I'm not 100% sure I can vouch for it or say, recommend it. The short version of my question is, what do you think it's worth I'm just a copy editor.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think it's worth trying to use that connection?
Oh, that is a good question. When is it appropriate for us to be in touch? Because I know a lot of you contract with publishers as well as with authors. And when do we introduce people? I will say for me, because I still have some agent contacts, and agents are like the holy grail of connections. I have introduced clients who came to me, through normal channels to agents twice in 8 years. And they were both books I didn't just believe in, but it wasn't oh, this is pretty good. It was like you need to see this. One was fiction, one was nonfiction. They were highly marketable. And that's my filter. I will help my clients, if it's good, I'm like, hey, here's 3 or 4 publishers I can think of that might be a good fit for you, and if you'd like me to help you with your query letter, I would be happy to do that. And even if you want to mention in your query letter, there's a difference between you recommending them and them saying in their letter that you have worked with them.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah, okay, I had to talk myself through that answer, but that's my answer is, you can, yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anything else? Yes.
So, a company like Lulu, which I've looked into a little bit recently for a client,
Mm-hmm.
it looks like to me that they're kind of like a middleman, because it looks like they use Ingram as a distribution center, so it's a
Good question. So everyone uses Ingram as a distribution center. The Ingram catalog is just where all of the print-on-demand books get listed. Kindle Direct, like Amazon's Kindle Direct, if you sign up for their little extended distribution, you get added to the Ingram catalog. So that is the way that the books are being sent out there. It's just who are you paying and trusting to print them.
right. So, but if they went to Ingram Spark
Mhm.
directly,
Mm-hmm.
that would
Ingram Spark is so in the same way that Amazon has 17 different companies, Ingram Distribution, Ingram Wholesale is not Ingram Spark, and Ingram Spark is not Ingram. You don't actually get a lot of anything special for your Ingram distribution by being part of Ingram Spark. Okay, we have time for one more question.
So is a hybrid publisher, because you're subsidizing it, are they one of the publishers that require in the contract that you'll buy 1,000 copies, or is that more of the
So the companies, the buy 1,000 copies tend to be the subsidy self-publishing presses. I do not know a hybrid publisher who says that the way that you are paying them is by a commitment to buying books, although I suppose technically it could be. The book buyback requirement is always a little tricky. A book buyback requirement means they're not a traditional publisher. They might be a subsidy press. You might be paying them to publish your book, and they're just filtering it under the way yes, you will agree to buy X number of books. Or they might be a hybrid who's getting their money in interesting ways. I have not messed around with enough hybrid contracts to know how they're all setting themselves up. But I think the important part there is if they're requiring you to give them money, it is not a traditional small press. Unless they're also giving you an advance and you're just giving, yeah, it's not. So that you know, this slideshow will be available through the Editors Guild somehow. We haven't quite figured out the details, but it'll be on that page. It is currently, if you go to Beth Justino and click on resources, it is the top link there. I do all my slideshows through SlideShare just to make it easy if there's something that you missed or you want to see, especially like that hybrid list that I blew through. If you have questions afterwards and you want to know things, like I said, I would give you my designers. This is my email address, bethjustino@gmail.com. I have a sign-up sheet up here if you are interested in being on the publishing mailing list. I tend to send out messages every quarter-ish with links to interesting things that are happening in the business side of publishing, as well as other classes and stuff that I'm teaching. Tell your clients, come yourself. Would love to see you. Copies of some of the books, both the collaborative and the ones I wrote, postcards, business cards, help yourself. Thank you guys so much for coming on Veterans Day on a dark November.